Yeah, let's go ahead. Thank you guys for coming today. I'm Amy Maddock, and I am, along with Rob, an executive director in the Office of Career Strategy, and we're very happy to have you here today. Rob, I'll turn it over
to you. So, as we said, we call this a forum because we want to introduce a few ideas, but then we certainly do want to take questions. It may be hard to get very specific on some of the concerns, so we're always going to invite you to have a conversation with your advisor. Many of us have drop-ins, how to schedule with us. So we want to resume these conversations with you if we're not able to get terribly specific, but there should be a Q&A portion that we hope you will find helpful. Just a real quick roadmap of what we're going to cover. We're going to go over some of the resources that we think you can be using to prepare for callbacks, a little bit on logistics and timing. Those questions tend to come up and be a little sticky. In terms of format, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can expect the interviews to proceed, what they'll look and feel like. We'll then dive in a little bit more into the preparation for these callbacks. Hint, they don't differ too much from your preparation for screeners, to be honest, but we want to give you some more thoughts on that. We'll cover the topic that we get a lot, which is what are my chances? And apologies that you'll see the animations going there automatically. And then finally, we'll cover what to do sort of after the callback is over. So I'm going to kick it over to Amy so she can talk a little bit more about the resources available to you to get ready.
You would think after being home for a year, I'd remember to take myself off mute. At this point, there's no sort of secret resource to preparing for a callback. And my guess is that you are probably very aware of the resources that we have available in order to prepare for an interview. Certainly the Road to OCI emails that you've received for the last several months have links to resources that you can use to research firms and, best practices for how to prepare for interviews. There will be another Road to OCI on Monday that talks a lot about callback interviews. So, you're encouraged to kind of look back at those. Also, hopefully by now you are all familiar with the interviewing page that you can link to from the OCI website. Particularly, I think the questions you can expect to be asked and the questions that you might want to consider asking would be good to take a look at in preparation for your callback interview, just so that you can have an opportunity to practice some additional questions that maybe you didn't get to in your 20-minute screeners. I think it's also really helpful to have sort of a deep bench of questions that you might want to ask over the course of your interview. And sometimes it's hard to kind of come up on those questions on your own. So that website, I think, is really good in terms of giving you some ideas of things that you might want to be looking at. And then also on the OCI webpage, there's a list of where 3Ls have worked. And these are 3Ls who have agreed to be resources to students who are going through the process. And so they can talk to you about their experience at the firm over the summer. They could talk to you about the interview, how they prepared, what to expect. And so you're encouraged to take a look at where the 3Ls have worked and reach out to them over the weekend and ask them some questions. In terms of logistics, the timing, it's in terms of scheduling these callbacks, typically sooner is better than later because classes are often filled on a rolling basis. And as you know, these firms, as much as we might like to think that they're only looking at Georgetown students, they are also recruiting at a lot of other schools. And so, you want to try to schedule your callbacks as soon as you can. But that may not always be possible. Again, because the firms are looking at other schools, sometimes you can't get in for a callback until a week or so down the road. And if that's the case, take the interview slot that's available and then let the recruiter know you'd be happy to come in earlier if there's a cancellation. We usually suggest that you try to schedule within 24 hours of getting the invitation. I think it shows interest in the firm. It also will help you get in sooner rather than later. And honestly, a lot of these firms, while callback invitations can come typically between 24 to 48 hours after your interview. Sometimes it takes a little longer, especially in this virtual world, to get all of the interviewers on the same page and decide who to call back and when. And a lot of times these law firms have waves, right? So they have their first round of callbacks, and then they see how those pan out, and then they bring in a second or third round of people. So it is possible that if you haven't heard anything, you may not be in like wave A, but you may be in wave B or C. You may be in the firm's hold pile. I do think it's important, if you haven't heard anything, to talk to your advisor about what you could be doing this weekend to help prepare for your screening interviews on Monday. And the Road to OCI on Monday will have some tips on other paths to pursue outside of OCI. So, you can take a look at that while also waiting to hear from your screening interviews. In terms, Rob, did you want to add something?
Great, thank you.
Okay. In terms of responsiveness, I mean, it's really important for you to respond to any calls that you get. And callback invitations are very likely to come by phone, but you want to respond to any calls you get in a timely manner. Have a professional voicemail on your phone so that recruiters or attorneys who are calling know that they've got the right person. You want to start to or continue to create the professional persona that you did during the screening interview. When you call the recruiter back, make sure that you have an idea of what your schedule looks like coming up, what your class schedule looks like, what other obligations that you might have, so that if you're on the phone and they ask if you can go ahead and schedule your interview, you have a sense of what your obligations are and are able to do so. It is a little bit of a logic game sometimes, trying to figure out when to schedule your callbacks and which callbacks to schedule when. Particularly if you are in the fortunate position of having multiple callbacks, you might want to schedule some of the firms that you think you're less interested in a little bit farther out, and the ones you're more interested in sooner. But it's rare that everyone has perfect information and is able to make those decisions on the phone. So if you have questions about scheduling callbacks, please feel free to reach out to your advisor, and we'd be happy to give you advice on how to schedule. There's less travel this year, actually probably no travel this year. All these callbacks will be done virtually. So hopefully it's not as much of a burden scheduling these callbacks as it might've been in other years when you're trying to schedule travel. We've gotten a lot of questions about class conflicts and how to avoid class conflicts, and it is strongly encouraged for you to avoid missing class as much as you possibly can. Although professors are aware that OCI finishes up on Monday and then there's the callback stage, and so they are aware that this process is going on. If you need to miss class, I would suggest reaching out to your professor to let him or her know, and to just make sure that you've given plenty of notice so they know where you are.
That's right. Okay, so in terms of the format, again, what to expect from the meeting, as Amy indicated, we expect these will all be virtual. So in years past, where you would have been invited to travel to the firm's office, meet with a slate of attorneys, maybe have a lunch or do a reception. Unfortunately, this year is going to be virtual. It does present some opportunities in being able to schedule, if you have the good fortune to have many of them in a tighter time, but we don't expect there to be travel. So virtual again, it could be on different platforms. We'll give a tickler about that. We'll talk a little bit about more later. It might not all be on Internex or Zoom, so do be ready for that. We think it to be substantially similar to screeners. That's what they've historically been. Typically, the firm is looking for that very amorphous, tough to define concept of fit, right? Do you sort of seem to understand what their culture is like? Do you want to work there? Do you see yourself, working in a particular practice area? Do you have the sort of skills to add value? And they're sussing this out usually again with resume-based questions. So we don't see hypotheticals or assessments typically being given at any stage of the process. It's more very much like the conversational meetings you've probably had with the firms thus far. I'll put a tickler here that, and we'll talk to this in the preparation piece, there may be a heightened standard of knowledge about how you fit at the firm. So that may be a distinction at the callback stage. But for the most part, we do expect this will be very similar to screeners. The note here about presentations and chats is because some firms may be trying to make it feel a little bit more distinctive, like you are visiting a specific place with these virtual meetings. So they may have, opening remarks by, a group of attorneys or the managing partner or something. They may have opportunities for you to sort of catch your breath in more informal conversations with junior associates to kind of take the temperature of what it's like to be a junior team member. It's important to remember that as nice as these more informal aspects may be, you're still being evaluated. So maintain the professionalism that you did when you were going through the interview. Stay curious, stay engaged, even at these maybe less formal portions. Let's jump in a little bit to the preparation piece. A lot of what served you well in preparing for your screening interviews really should be what you're doing for this, right? So any of the online resources, recalling some of the specific conversations you may have had with attorneys at the firm, that's going to be your ammunition for this. The tailoring piece is going to be sort of the heightened standard slightly here. Again, where you may have said, oh, I'm really interested in litigation and white collar at the screening interview, this may be the stage to say, and I know that you have a 4th-year training academy for litigators. That seems really interesting. I know that you serve a lot of healthcare clients. That's an industry that's interesting to me for X, Y, and Z reasons. So I can see myself really taking to the work and liking the training that you offer, right? Something slightly heightened to show the fit and to show that you're ready to kind of jump in and do the work there. A way to do this could be to go back to your screener and sort of look at the notes that you took there. Maybe you were able to dive into something more distinctive and specific about the firm that makes it stand out for you. So we do recommend going back to that screening interview to draw on that. Further, regarding the screening interview, we recommend that you reach out to the screener if you schedule the callback to say, good news, I'm coming in. I'm excited to be meeting with folks. You want to think of that screener as your ally, right? That's the person who said to the firm, let's spend more time and money investing more time and money in getting to know this person. So they're on your side. So give them every reason to want to stay on your side by showing enthusiasm and saying, I'll be meeting. Sometimes you can give them the slate of folks that you'll be meeting with, and that can be helpful too. A word on that, we expect that the recruiter will ask you, as Amy was indicating, what your interests are. So have some interests ready in terms of practice area, and they may try to create a slate for you that aligns with that interest. Typically, if you don't get the slate 24 hours or so before the meeting, you can ping the recruiter and say, hey, if it's possible, I'd love to know who I'm meeting with. If it's not possible, and I totally understand, it's a very busy time and you can roll with it and you'll be fine. So we do want you to keep in mind here that third bullet about what's important to you. This is a time where you're trying on the firm a little bit more than maybe at a screener where they've had a lot of leverage to sort of sift through folks. Now it's a time where there's a little bit more of a match emerging. So what is important to you about the firm? A really important note here, you will have time if you get an offer to ask lots of questions to the firm. And you can ask those questions in a really candid way. We've never seen a firm withdraw an offer for the type of questions a student was asking about fit and other sort of things about the firm. So there will be time still to test this later. We recommend that you're getting a sense of what's important to you, that you're asking curious questions. You might be talking about assignment system, mentoring, training, culture, affinity groups, those sorts of things that could interest you. The final piece of prep that we'll offer is to test the platform. If the firm is using a different platform than you're used to, make sure you have the AV specs all set up. Make sure you know of any troubleshooting resources that you might have. Often our hope is that the firm is going to give you a backup plan should the connection get disrupted. Maybe the attorney calls you, maybe you talk to the recruiter, but do your best to sort of know what the protocol is there for linking in on if the platform is different. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Amy to talk about a question we get a lot.
Yeah, it's a question that we get a lot that's almost impossible for us to answer. So what are my chances? Well, the data shows that nationally, anyone's chances are about 50% most recently, but that is very much dependent on the firm, the market, and the candidate. So on any slate of interviews, I would say, someone's success or failure is just very much dependent on who they are as an individual, what their credentials are, how they present in an interview. It's really based on your performance. And so, to this last bullet point here, the controllable, this is where the preparation piece comes in. This is where, you take the time to come up with good questions, you come up with the time to, really do your research and go into the interview as prepared as you can, so that you're giving yourself the best chance that you possibly can.
Yeah, I think it's a misreading of the data to say that my chances are 1 and 2 across the board. That's not what that number means. How high your chances are, as Amy said, has a lot to do with you as a candidate, the firm, the location, and all you can control is making your chances as strong as possible by preparing and doing your best in the interview. So, okay, after the fact, first thing you should be doing is sending a thank you note. Send it to the recruiter, to each attorney you've talked to. You'll want to get specific in the attorney note. This should be 3-4 sentences at the most. But hearkening to something that you talked about in the interview to make it feel specific to that attorney. If you are going to cut and paste any element of this thank you note, make sure you clear the formatting on your emails platform, because sometimes depending on what they're reading on, they can see where the cut and paste happened. The font looks different. Of course, look for typos, make sure you get the name spelling right, those sorts of things. Send anywhere from 12 to 24 hours in advance, following the meeting. The waiting game can be hard. Sometimes firms don't get back to you quickly. We're hearing from our recruiting colleagues that it's a lot harder to convene recruiting committees. It's a lot harder to corral all the information that's coming in. So we expect there could be a delay on their end for getting back to people with offers. Not always, but sometimes. It's hard, and we understand that, but we do encourage patience. You can start being politely persistent, maybe 10 days to 2 weeks after going on the callback. If we hear that the market's moving faster, we'll update you and say, hey, if you haven't heard in a week, let's get in touch. But traditionally, it's been about that time to give the firms a chance to make a decision. Now, let's say you do get the offer. This is fantastic, right? Great news. We're excited about that. You do want to respond quickly to acknowledge that. A real challenge for firms is not getting communication in regularly from students who have given offer to. So respond quickly to acknowledge it. You have 2 weeks per the Georgetown guidelines that we circulate to firms. We encourage 2 weeks to make a decision from the date of the offer letter. It's our experience that most firms want to abide by that 2 weeks to give you some meaningful time to think about it. But it may mean that you don't have the lineup for all the firms at exactly the same time, and talk to your advisor about how to sort of make things synchronize if you're waiting to hear still. The firm may stay in communication with you during this period after an offer. There may be a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. Do your best to respond to each of these, right? Just as a professional courtesy, but also for the firm you end up going to, it's a demonstration of interest and a way to start building relationships positively before you even get there. If you have the very fortunate problem of being overwhelmed by people who want you to join their firm, we've seen this happen occasionally with students say, I can't respond to the emails I'm getting and the calls, I've got classes going on. Come talk to us. Sometimes there are ways you can talk to the recruiter about sort of lightening that load, or maybe just professionally communicating your appreciation for all the attention you're getting, but saying, if I have anything further, I'll come to you. That can be an issue sometimes as students are deciding. Again, a very good problem to have. If you want to accept the offer, right? We recommend that if there's any attorney that's emerged as a really great champion or ally for you in the process, you do them the courtesy of giving them a call to say, great news, I'm going to be joining. I really appreciate your guidance throughout the process. And then you'd follow up with an email to the recruiter. You want that acceptance in writing so you have a record of it by the deadline that the firm has put in the offer letter. So moving on to declining or canceling callbacks, should you decide to decline, it says, okay, this happens every year. Recruiters are counting on it. It may feel like breaking up with someone you've been dating, but I promise you that they'll be happy to invite the next great candidate to join the firm after that. If you had a mentor or a guide or a champion, and it is a nice professional courtesy to call them and say, look, I'm going to be declining and I'm going another way, but I appreciate all your time and help. It's a very much relationship driven industry, so keeping those bonds strong can help. We've heard time and again that students will lateral over to a firm that they had a good relationship with during OCI after going somewhere else to start perhaps. But again, you'd want to just memorialize your decision in an email to the recruiter so you have a record of what your choice was. And sometimes students will cancel callbacks. They'll say, look, I've got an offer that I prefer to this and I want to free up the spot. That often is great for your Georgetown colleagues. Sometimes people will want to roll the dice and say, I don't have the offer yet, but I don't see myself there. We encourage you to come talk to us to maybe think through all the ramifications of that. If you're going to cancel, do try to do so about 24 hours in advance, so the recruiters have time to sort of, tell the attorneys, obviously, and maybe bring more people in during that slot. That can get a little nuanced, so definitely feel free to reach out if you find yourself in that position. Okay, that's what we wanted to sort of do for the formal presentation piece of this. We're happy, as we said, to take questions that you might have. You can chat them to Amy, you can say them out loud, whatever's helpful for you.
I have a couple of questions in the chat, Rob. What is your advice for declining a callback when offered over the phone? Should we decline outright or decline over email?
So it sounds, I guess the situation I'm envisioning is, you don't want to take a callback and they call you and give you the callback.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think if at the moment and you're able to say, thank you so much, this is terrific. My plans are such that I will be pursuing other options. So I can tell you now that this is probably not going to be the right fit for me. Great. I don't think we've seen that situation a lot. Doesn't mean it wouldn't arise. If you wanted to take an hour or two to sort of pause and think about it and then write back, I think that's fine too. But if you're ready to do it on the phone, I think the recruiter would appreciate the certainty and then be able to sort of move on with their logic game on their end.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a good question. Something I think a lot of students struggle with. Absent the advantages of in-person, how do you recommend we gauge fit in a video chat?
Yeah, that's a signature challenge and just sort of a large issue that hangs over this whole thing. I would remind you that you're going to have the opportunity, if you get the offer, to keep talking to people, and often that's a better time to sort of really focus in. You may want to talk to people from certain affinity groups in the organization, partners, with certain personal or family backgrounds that are interesting. You may want to talk to some of the alums of firms to get a feel for what it was like to be there. So I wouldn't say the sum total of gauging fit is going to have to be done over, sort of the time you're there. Do look to the other pieces of research. Talking to students who went there last summer could be a way to do that. But for a variety of reasons, leaning on the research that's come before and the research that will come after may be more important to sort of flesh that out. And we're here too to sort of bounce ideas off of that. We're operating in an environment where certainty is sort of less high than it ever has been. So I don't know if people ever know with absolute certainty if it's the right fit for them, but we get that may be lower, so we can talk through you about sort of taking a leap of faith on that. My 2 cents of this, at the end of the day, what a firm sort of offers is not like a monolithic, you will fit here if you walk in the door or not. You have a lot of ability to shape that once you're there and sort of how you behave and the relationships you create as well. So I would view fit as sort of a dynamic thing that you can have some influence over once you get there. So I think a lot of tentacles to that. Those are some thoughts I would offer. Amy, do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot with students, and I agree. I agree with everything that Rob said, and I think it is kind of hard to suss out on a video call. One of the things, and if any of you have been in a reception with me, then you've heard me ask this question. But one of the things that I've been asking firms since we've all been virtual, which I think is helpful in sort of getting a sense of like the culture of the firm, which can contribute to whether or not you would fit, is asking how they've handled, maintaining a sense of community and, how they've handled sort of keeping the individual attorneys and staff all sort of linked together and motivated and, connected in this virtual environment. And it's been really interesting to hear some of the responses that firms have given. And I think some firms have done a really, really good job of sort of maintaining community and maintaining, a very strong, work environment that where people feel very connected, and other firms have not put as much of a priority on that. And I do think, asking a question about how COVID has sort of impacted, relationships at the firm can be somewhat telling as to what the culture is like and where the firm sort of puts its priorities. So it's not a perfect solution by any means, but it is something that I think can kind of help you sort of determine the culture. We've gotten a question, which I think is a good one, about whether or not students should expect callback phone calls or emails over the weekend or just on normal business days. And I think related to that is whether calls could come in after hours. And I think, Rob, please tell me if you disagree, but I think the answer is absolutely. Calls or emails could come over the weekend. This is a time of year where we and our colleagues are kind of working around the clock. And so it wouldn't surprise me one bit for you to get, a phone call or an email from a recruiter at some point over the weekend, or, at 10 o'clock at night. I don't know, Rob, if you have a different opinion, but
I totally agree, and I'll a rider on that. Amy, you had mentioned that a lot may come in via phone. Just as many could come in via email. So check your spam and promotions as well.
Let's see. Heightened standard of knowledge about the firm. Do you have any tips or suggestions for the kinds of things that I should be sure to know, or ways to do this research?
Yeah, I was trying to give a flavor of it. I don't know if it's knowledge about the firm, right? So it's not like memorizing headcounts or the last 10 deals that they did or anything like that. I don't think it's a trivia question. I think it's really just demonstrating how what you're looking for is provided by the firm, or how the firm provides, opportunities for its attorneys to be great attorneys. So, again, whereas like I want to be a litigator and I want to work in DC may at some level have been sufficient for a screener. I think you just need to go a little bit deeper to show, okay, what about this firm's platform for litigators in DC is distinctive and interesting? It could be sort of the way they train people. It could be the type of cases that they bring on. So you might be bringing in other strands or other aspects of the firm that together make it distinctive to you. We encourage a constellation approach at the screening interview where you're looking at a couple of different factors. I'd say if anything, you'd want maybe even more factors here and just know a little bit more about each factor. But I really don't want to turn this into a sort of a trivia game where you're trying to show like how much you're interested by saying how many things you know about the firm. It really is more about sort of connecting in a slightly more in-depth way by digging in on what does training mean, what does culture mean, what does the assignment system look like, and how would you fit with that?
Yeah, I agree. What should we do if we get a deadline for an offer but still haven't heard from another preferred firm? I would say talk to your advisor to come up with a strategy. I mean, it's a possibility of that you may be in a position to ask for an extension, or you may be able to tell the firm that you haven't heard from that you have an offer pending, and maybe that would drive them to make a decision a little bit quicker, or at least give you a sense of where they are in the process. But I think, I would talk to your advisor about how to navigate those conversations and make sure that you're asking the questions the right way.
Yeah, I think that's totally right, Amy. Like the factors I would want to be unpacking with the student talking to you there are: do I have any champions or allies there who I can go to? What's been my most recent conversation with the firm? What is the timing that I'm asking them to accelerate by? If I just had the callback yesterday and I have a deadline coming, 3 days away or whatever it is, it's going to be hard to say, can you give me a decision in 3 days? So there's a lot of, aspects and angles to that too. If it is the preferred firm, you'd want to go to the preferred firm first to say, hey, look, I'm really excited. What do you think your timeline would be to give me a decision, before going back to the less preferred firm to ask for the extension? So there's a couple of different angles to it. And we're happy to sort of think it through with you to come up with something that you feel works right. There's really no script.
Can we schedule callbacks over the weekend? I mean, I know that in previous years, firms have offered what they would call super Saturdays, where they would bring in students, and not all firms did this, but some did. They'd bring in students for interviews on the weekend, but I honestly have not heard of the weekends being offered this year. That doesn't mean that they're not. I don't know, Rob, if you have.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it either. I mean, the firm's going to tell you what the openings are, and it's not like you could sort of go back and say, well, how about Saturday morning? They'll sort of say, these are our openings, you choose. So it'll really just depend on what they say. So the question maybe is not, can I schedule a call, but will firms offer weekends is a different way to think about the question. And I think I haven't heard of it this year. I wouldn't be surprised.
Are callbacks a good time to ask tougher questions, like about parental leave, or whether the firm has had layoffs during COVID?
Yeah, I think they can be. Again, you can ask the really hard questions if you get the offer. So to some degree, I want you to be focusing on getting the offer, not turning this callback into a deposition of the firm. The firm is going to expect you to be asking some questions that suss it out. That'll just show good judgment in you as a candidate to want to ask questions that differentiate it and are meaningful. But I wouldn't try to like dig into, HR policies and really, expect them to sort of open up, the books and show you stuff that they're not going to give to somebody who's not yet a part of them or offered to be a part of them. So I'd show a little bit of judgment on how much I push there. A related question here, sometimes students will say, is how much do grades matter? How much leverage do I have in the room? Historically, what we've seen is that grades are not a huge issue at the callback. The firm has sort of vetted you as a candidate, has seen your grades and saw fit to bring you back and spend more time and money interviewing you. So, typically it's not like you get there and then everyone goes, oh, wow, you don't really have the grades for us. Like, well, you knew that. Why would you call me back? We can't guarantee somebody's not going to ask you about it. So, what would you say if the historical GPA doesn't align with where you are? But we don't think that'll be sort of a point of leverage in these conversations. So I would say I think you can ask questions that are a little more candid and transparent, but do remember that if you get the offer, if you market that interest and you show that you want to be there and get the offer, you can ask the really hard questions after you get the offer.
Yeah, I totally agree. We do have some questions on what we're hearing about callbacks, like which firms have given callbacks and whether or not if a student hasn't heard from an interview on Tuesday, whether they should assume that they're not getting a callback.
Yeah. I think, and I'll ask you to fill in. I know you've been thinking about this a lot too. I'd say our knowledge is really impressionistic at this point, and it depends on what students are telling us, right? At this point, we're sort of the middle person between the firm and the student. So in many cases, you've got more information than we do. We've heard offhandedly all the different counselors of some of them. What we've seen students do in the past, and I think my understanding is are doing at other schools, is they sort of get together and share knowledge. Now, whether that's best done through a message board or maybe the SBA or through some sort of Google Doc that's shared among the sections, I think we would leave to students. But sort of the real-time information coming in is sitting with the students on this one. Typically, New York is really fast. So we've heard of a decent amount of New York firms, some DC firms. I've heard of an LA firm or two. But again, super impressionistic on our part because it only depends on what we're hearing from our from the folks in our sections. Amy spoke to the waves piece at the beginning. So, Amy, fill in here where you think I'm missing something. But, the Tuesday firms probably have their first wave out by this point is my strong suspicion. How often they go to the second wave really is a function of how well the people in the first wave perform and what their class needs are and how much they may have hired before OCI. So it's certainly a possibility. We're going to encourage you, you'll see in the Road to OCI on Monday, that you can do some follow-up if you haven't heard yet next week. My 2 cents on this is that the better use of your energy and focus is on any upcoming interviews that you have. Sort of getting ready for Monday, any other applications you put in outside the OCI process, and as well outline for you on Monday, what other opportunities might be worth pursuing as you wait to hear from places rather than, focusing on the wait. But Amy, what have I missed there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're totally right. And I think the wave point is well taken. And, I think even if some of your classmates have heard that, from firms that they've gotten callbacks and you interviewed with that same firm, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't also hear from them. I do think, I think Rob's right that there are, better ways of using your time than to be particularly worried about that. I think a related question that we get is, will you definitely hear from firms that you're not getting a callback from? And the answer by and large is you won't necessarily hear from those firms. And so I understand that can be frustrating for students. But, if you think about it from the recruiter's perspective, it's a volume game. They are dealing with thousands and thousands of applicants. And while they would like to reach out to every student that they have the privilege of interviewing, they don't always have the chance to do it, at least in a timely way. And so if you have any questions about specific firms or about your situation, or if you want to, plan your strategy for Monday and going forward, please reach out to your advisor to kind of discuss your specific situation. And there's a question here for firms who call references. Does the 24 to 48 hour rule still apply for callbacks? If they call references?
Guideline, not a rule, right? We certainly want to say that it's not a hard and fast rule. This is what firms can, their best practices is to try to do that. So I just want to be super clear on that. You know, in the past, we've seen firms that really take a push with references, and particularly Covington, go a little bit slower in that process. I think over the years, we've seen those firms speed up to sort of meet the market and not be, you know, behind on when they're inviting people in. So my strong suspicion is that if the firm is going to do reference checks, they would rev up their, you know, recruiting engine and try to do the reference check in that quick period so that they can get going on that and figure out who they want to call back. But again, no hard and fast rule on that.
Yeah, I agree. So that was the last question in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions for us? Going once, going twice. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and feel free to reach out to your advisor with any additional questions you might have.
Bye.
Have a great weekend. You've earned it.